Hey everyone! So, it's pretty much common knowledge that Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker in the 2008 movie The Dark Knight, directed by Christopher Nolan, is often hailed as one of the most profound takes on the Joker character ever. He's seen as the ultimate embodiment of a nihilistic persona. His actions and words reflect a deep rejection of meaning, morality, and order. He's not just a villain, he's a mirror reflecting the fragility of human values. His performance shows us just how tough it is to hold on to moral principles when faced with chaos and meaninglessness. But hold up, what is nihilism, anyway? What are its core ideas, how did it develop over time, and what are some common criticisms of it? That's what we're diving into in today's video. Let's get into it. Alright, let's break it down. Nihilism is a philosophical movement that's often seen as a radical form of skepticism. The term comes from the Latin word nihil, which means nothing. At its core, nihilism questions the meaning, value, and even the existence of traditional moral, religious, and metaphysical systems. Basically, it's the idea that life has no objective meaning, no higher purpose, and no absolute values. To really get what nihilism is all about, we've got to dive into its different aspects. So, let's take a closer look. The fascinating history of nihilism is a journey that spans thousands of years. At its core, nihilism is all about rejecting meaning, values, and truth. But how it's been expressed has changed a lot over time. Way back in ancient times, we already had thinkers who touched on nihilistic ideas. The Greek skeptics, like Pyrrho of Elis, questioned whether objective truth or knowledge was even possible. Their radical doubt about everything sounds a lot like the beginnings of epistemological nihilism. Then there were the sophists, who argued that moral and cultural values are relative, shaped by society. Protagoras famously said, "Man is the measure of all things," hinting there are no universal values, an early glimpse of moral nihilism. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, where the Christian worldview reigned supreme. Back then, meaning and values were grounded in God, and nihilism was seen as heresy. It challenged the divine source of truth and morality. Interestingly, some mystical movements, like negative theology, flirted with nihilistic thoughts by emphasizing how inaccessible divine truth really is. Think of Meister Eckhart, who talked about letting go of all that is nothingness, including our human concepts of God. Jump to the Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, and we see the seeds of modern nihilism being planted. The era's focus on reason and science started to question traditional religious and metaphysical foundations. David Hume, for example, was a hardcore skeptic who laid the groundwork for moral nihilism by showing that morality is based on human feelings, not some objective truth. By the 19th century, nihilism became a bigger deal, thanks to cultural and philosophical shifts. In Russia, the term nihilism blew up after Ivan Turgenev's novel Fathers and Sons in 1862. The nihilists were young intellectuals who rejected traditional authorities like the church and the nobility. They were politically active too. Groups like the Narodniki wanted to tear down existing institutions and rebuild society based on science and rationality. The 20th century saw nihilism evolve in response to war, technological progress, and the breakdown of values. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus tackled nihilism head-on. Sartre thought life was meaningless but believed we're free to create our own purpose through our choices. Camus called life absurd but said we should embrace it anyway and find meaning through rebellion, like in the myth of Sisyphus. Existentialism became a kind of counter to nihilism, focusing on human freedom and responsibility. Postmodernism took things further. Think Michel Foucault or Jacques Derrida. These guys exposed the grand narratives of modernity, like science, progress, and rationality, as social constructs. They showed how power shapes what we call truth, feeding into a kind of epistemological nihilism. Nihilism also hit the arts. Movements like Dadaism and Surrealism blew up traditional aesthetics and values. In literature, Franz Kafka's novels and Samuel Beckett's plays captured the bleakness of existence. Even punk music carried the nihilistic vibe, rejecting norms and authority. In the 21st century, nihilism is taking on new forms. Digital nihilism, for example, is all about losing meaning in the endless flood of information and fragmented identities online. Then there's the climate crisis and rapid technological change. These global challenges leave many feeling powerless and questioning the future. Modern philosophers and spiritual movements are still grappling with how to respond to nihilism, often looking to community, spirituality, or creating new structures of meaning. Alright, let's break down the different types of nihilism: metaphysical, moral, epistemological, and existential. Each one zooms in on a specific area of philosophy, with its own core ideas and implications. Let's take a closer look. Metaphysical nihilism is the idea that nothing necessarily has to exist. It questions the existence of the world as we know it, denying the idea of a fundamental reality or necessary structure to being. Basically, everything that exists could just as easily not exist. There's no absolute existence, no unchanging substance, and no ultimate foundation for reality. An extreme form even argues for the possibility of a completely empty world where literally nothing exists. Traditional concepts like substance, essence, or universal principles are dismissed as meaningless or baseless. Big takeaway: it challenges the idea that the world has any inherent order or structure. An example? A metaphysical nihilist might say that even basic ideas like space and time aren't objectively real, they're just constructs we impose on reality. Moral nihilism is also called ethical nihilism. This is the belief that there are no objective moral values, rules, or truths. What we consider good or bad is entirely relative and subjective. Moral principles are just human inventions. Moral judgments depend on cultural, social, or individual contexts, meaning there's no universal foundation for what's right or wrong. This often leads to the conclusion that there's no inherent reason to act morally. Big takeaway: without objective morality, the legitimacy of laws, religions, or societal norms comes into question. An example? A moral nihilist might say, murder isn't objectively good or bad, it's just an action judged differently depending on the society or legal system. Now, this is where things get skeptical. Epistemological nihilism is radical doubt about knowledge and truth. It argues that true knowledge is either impossible or that objective truth doesn't exist independently of human perspectives. All knowledge is uncertain, based on subjective perceptions, interpretations, or constructs. Even science is seen as limited and contingent since it's based on human assumptions and methods. Big takeaway: if knowledge isn't reliable, how can we ever know anything for sure? An example? An epistemological nihilist might say, we can't truly know if the world outside our minds exists because all knowledge is filtered through our subjective perception. Finally, we've got existential nihilism, which hits closest to home for many. This view holds that life has no inherent meaning or purpose. It's based on the idea that the universe is indifferent, there's no higher plan, no God, no ultimate goal. Life is meaningless, but that doesn't mean we're stuck in despair. Humans are free to create their own subjective meaning through choices and creativity. Big takeaway: life may be objectively meaningless, but we can still find meaning through our own actions and mindset. An example? Albert Camus used the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate this. Sisyphus rolls a rock up a hill, only for it to roll back down, forever. It's absurd and pointless, but Camus argues that Sisyphus can still find joy in the process and embrace his situation. So, each form of nihilism looks at the world through a specific lens, whether it's existence, morality, knowledge, or meaning, and denies the existence of any objective foundations in that area. What they all have in common is that they radically challenge traditional assumptions about reality and human life. Nihilism forces us to confront big questions about meaning, truth, and values, often leading to some serious existential reflection. But hey, that's what makes it so fascinating, right? One of the biggest philosophical heavyweights of all time is Friedrich Nietzsche. This guy practically put nihilism on the philosophical map. For Nietzsche, nihilism is all about realizing that the traditional values, ideals, and truths that shaped Western civilization for centuries no longer hold up. It's like the rug gets pulled out from under everything we thought gave life meaning, and we're left asking, what's the point of it all? Nietzsche called this the collapse of the highest values. Things like truth, morality, religion, and purpose, those guiding stars of the past, are no longer credible. He saw this as inevitable, not just a problem, but part of the cultural evolution of the West. One of Nietzsche's most famous, and misunderstood, lines is "God is dead." And no, he didn't mean it literally. When Nietzsche says God, he's talking about the metaphysical foundations of Western culture, especially Christianity and its moral framework. He argues that modern society, with its emphasis on science, enlightenment, and rationalism, has eroded belief in these foundations. The fallout? Without a higher power or divine plan, there's no absolute basis for morality or meaning. Society faces a crisis of values, leading to confusion and disorientation. So, God is dead isn't just a statement, it's a wake-up call. Humanity no longer believes in a higher purpose, and that leaves us with the task of finding, or creating, meaning on our own. Nietzsche identified 2 ways people deal with the collapse of meaning. First, passive nihilism. This is the give up and scroll TikTok approach. People resign themselves to the meaninglessness of life without taking action. They might escape into distractions like comfort, routine, or superficial pleasures. Key traits are pessimism and depression, acceptance of meaninglessness without trying to overcome it. An example, a society obsessed with consumerism and shallow entertainment to avoid asking the tough questions. Nietzsche saw this as a weak response, basically letting the crisis win. Second, active nihilism. Now, this is where Nietzsche gets excited. Active nihilism is all about rejecting the old, crumbling values and creating space for something new. It's a rebellion against outdated systems and an acknowledgement that meaninglessness can actually be an opportunity. Key traits are destruction of old values to make way for new ones, embracing the lack of meaning as a chance to create something better. An example, revolutionary movements in art, philosophy, or politics that challenge traditional ideas and open up new possibilities. Nietzsche believed active nihilism was the path forward. It's how we overcome the crisis and start building something meaningful. So, where does all this nihilism come from? Nietzsche blames 2 big influences. Plato's idea of a true world of perfect forms undermines the value of the real, tangible world we live in. This mindset devalues life by focusing on some higher, unreachable ideal. By placing ultimate meaning in an afterlife, Christianity shifts the focus away from living fully in the present. It makes life here on earth feel secondary, like a waiting room for heaven. With the death of God, these systems collapse, and humanity faces a world stripped of metaphysical meaning. For Nietzsche, nihilism isn't just a dead end, it's a challenge and an opportunity. Enter the Übermensch, or Overman, Nietzsche's vision of the ideal human who rises above nihilism to create new values. The Übermensch is self-determined, they create their own values and purpose. He is life-affirming, they accept life in all its absurdity, including suffering and chaos. And he's as creative, they see the destruction of old values as a chance for radical innovation. Nietzsche gives us some tools to tackle nihilism head-on. First, will to power. This isn't just about domination, it's the drive to grow, overcome challenges, and create meaning. Instead of passively accepting life's meaninglessness, the will to power pushes us to shape life on our terms. Second, a more fatty, love of fate. This is about embracing life as it is, everything, from the joys to the struggles. Nietzsche believed that by fully accepting the absurdity and hardships of life, we could transform them into sources of strength and vitality. Nietzsche saw nihilism as the central challenge of modernity, a period where old values would crumble, leaving humanity in a state of crisis. But he also believed this destruction was necessary to make way for something new. His philosophy challenges us not just to survive nihilism but to use it as a springboard for growth, creativity, and a reimagined sense of purpose. But not everyone's on board with the whole nothing matters vibe. Critics from religion, philosophy, culture, politics, and even psychology have been coming for nihilism hard, and today we're breaking it all down. First up, religion. Religions are like, hold up, nihilism, you're forgetting something big, the transcendent. Here's their deal. First, loss of the transcendent. Nihilism denies any higher power or metaphysical meaning. Religions argue that without a relationship to something bigger, like God, life gets pretty empty. They're saying, hey, without faith, people are left staring into the void, feeling lost. Second, the absolutist claim. Nihilists often act like the loss of meaning is permanent. Religious critics call BS on that, saying meaning and truth can still be found through faith and spiritual experience. They're like, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Religions offer frameworks that don't rely on human constructs but instead tap into something divine or eternal. Now let's turn to the philosophers. They've got beef too, and it's pretty intellectual. First, self-contradiction. Nihilism loves to say, there's no objective truth, but wait, doesn't that statement claim to be true? Critics point out this logical contradiction, and it kinda undercuts the whole thing. Second, narrow view of values. Nihilists think values only count if they're universal or objective. Philosophers like William James, a pragmatist icon, are like, dude, chill. Values can still matter even if they're subjective or relational. It's about what works for people, not some cosmic scoreboard. Oh, and let's not forget Nietzsche himself. Even the godfather of nihilism wasn't a fan of the passive kind, the whatever attitude. He thought it was weak and believed we should overcome nihilism, not let it define us. For Nietzsche, nihilism is like a storm you get through, not where you pitch your tent. Next, existentialists like Sartre and Camus are stepping in, and their vibe is surprisingly hopeful. First, misreading meaninglessness. They agree with nihilists that life doesn't come with a pre-packaged meaning. But instead of crying about it, existentialists say, cool, that means we're free to create our own meaning. For them, the lack of inherent purpose is empowering, not depressing. Second, the danger of passivity. Passive nihilism, where people just give up and stop caring, is a total no-go for existentialists. They see it as a weak response to life's challenges. Instead, they say we should embrace the absurdity of life and take responsibility for making it meaningful. It's not about giving up, it's about stepping up. Moving on, let's look at how nihilism plays out in the big picture, society and culture. First, cynicism and anomie. Nihilism can make people, and entire societies, super cynical or just plain indifferent. If nothing matters, why bother following any rules or building anything meaningful? Critics argue that communities need shared values and goals to thrive, and nihilism pulls the rug out from under all that. Second, political consequences. Here's where it gets dicey. Nihilism can lead to dangerous extremes in politics. Historically, it's been linked to movements that want to tear everything down, anarchists, extremists, you name it. Without a foundation of shared values, you get chaos with no clear path forward. And finally, we've got the psychologists weighing in. They're not fans either, and for good reason. First, mental health risks. Nihilism can mess with your head. The loss of meaning and orientation leads some people straight into depression, anxiety, or an existential crisis. Critics say nihilism overlooks how much humans need a sense of purpose and belonging for their well-being. Second, underestimating human resilience. Here's the flip side. People are a lot more resilient than nihilists give them credit for. Even in the worst circumstances, humans have this incredible ability to find or create meaning. Critics argue that nihilism totally underestimates this strength. So, what's the verdict? Critics from all sides, religion, philosophy, culture, psychology, agree on one thing: nihilism doesn't have to be the end of the road. Whether it's through faith, creative philosophy, or just embracing human resilience, there are ways to push back against the emptiness and build something better. Alright, folks, let's take a breath because we just dove into a lot of theory there. But let's switch gears and talk about what we're really here for: Heath Ledger's Joker and why he's often seen as the ultimate embodiment of nihilism. Grab your popcorn, this one's gonna be a ride. Step 1. The Joker's appearance and behavior. First off, let's talk about the basics. That messy, chaotic makeup? The greasy hair? The whole disheveled vibe? It's not just a style choice. This dude's entire look screams, I reject your societal norms. Add to that his uncontrollable laughter and his love of chaos and violence, and you've got someone who's basically saying, screw your rules, life is meaningless. Step 2. No goals, no plans, just chaos. The thing about Ledger's Joker is that he doesn't have some grand, world domination scheme. He flat out says, you know what I am? I'm a dog chasing cars. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I caught it. He's not in it for money, power, or politics. His entire mission is to tear down the systems we hold dear, justice, morality, you name it. He wants to expose them as illusions, and he does it in the most dramatic ways possible. Step 3. The ferry scene, testing moral fragility. Remember the ferry scene? The Joker pits two groups, civilians and prisoners, against each other, forcing them to decide whether to blow up the other group to save themselves. It's a masterclass in showing how fragile moral values can be under pressure. And don't forget how he corrupts Harvey Dent, Gotham's symbol of law and order. Turning Dent into Two-Face is the Joker's way of proving that even the best of us can fall when chaos takes over. Step 4. Burning the money. One of the most iconic Joker moments? That giant pile of cash going up in flames while he says, it's not about money. It's about sending a message. Everything burns, this isn't just shock value. It's him spitting in the face of materialism and showing that all these systems, capitalism, wealth, power, are just meaningless constructs. For him, it's all about breaking the system. Step 5. An agent of chaos. The Joker calls himself an agent of chaos, and boy, does he live up to it. He sees chaos as the real natural order, and his entire deal is blowing up the illusion of control. He even says that people who cling to plans are the real monsters. His unpredictability? That's the point. He's honest about his madness, and that honesty highlights how meaningless conventional order really is. Step 6. Exposing society's hypocrisy. Here's where the Joker really flexes his nihilistic muscles. He argues that morality is just a joke, a thin layer of civility that people drop the second things get tough. That interrogation scene with Batman? Chilling. He says, their morals, their code, it's a bad joke. Dropped at the first sign of trouble. When the chips are down, these civilized people? They'll eat each other. I'm not a monster. I'm just ahead of the curve, he's basically saying, society? A fragile house of cards. People? Just waiting to turn on each other. Step 7. Identity and truth, the scar stories. Now, let's talk about those scar stories. Every time the Joker explains how he got those scars, it's a different tale. Is he lying? Does it matter? This constant shifting undermines the idea of truth itself. He's showing that facts are just as malleable as values. It's all part of his nihilistic philosophy, nothing, not even truth, is fixed. Step 8. The Batman connection. Here's where things get really interesting, the Joker and Batman. The Joker straight up tells Batman, I don't want to kill you. What would I do without you? You complete me. He sees Batman as the yin to his yang, part of the same flawed system he's trying to destroy. The Joker's goal isn't just chaos for chaos's sake, it's to prove that Batman's belief in order and justice is just as much of an illusion as everything else. Every plan, every scheme, every showdown is designed to push Batman to his breaking point. He's constantly trying to make Batman compromise his values, like when he forces him to choose between saving Rachel or Harvey. Step 9. Nihilism in action. Ultimately, the Joker doesn't destroy for personal gain. He destroys to show how meaningless the systems we rely on really are. His actions are theater, a way to hold up a mirror to society and say, look at how fragile your beliefs are. So, there you have it. Heath Ledger's Joker isn't just a villain, he's a walking, talking embodiment of nihilism. He's here to burn it all down, not to win, but to prove a point, that all the things we think give life meaning, order, morality, truth, are just illusions. Before we wrap this up, let me leave you with one last thought. Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker? Absolutely iconic. I mean, who doesn't love his performance? It's chilling, brilliant, unforgettable. But here's the thing, as fascinating as nihilism is as a concept, and as much as it makes for a compelling character, it's not exactly a great blueprint for real-life human interaction. Nihilism doesn't recognize universal rules or norms, and, let's face it, societies need shared values and goals to function. Without them, we'd be looking at endless conflict and total chaos. So yeah, while the Joker's philosophy makes for incredible storytelling, it's not what we'd call a solid foundation for a stable, functioning society.